Restream's got us up. So I think we're going to go ahead and get back started here. Just for anyone that missed it. Okay, we're back up. Thanks, buddy. Who is that? Travi? Thanks, dude. Appreciate it. All right, so we're back up. New link. Sometimes that happens. Stream died out of nowhere. No idea what's happening. I think it was a streaming software, but we're back talking about it. Just give me, before we move on to the next game, what is your general recap? Outside of Watkins, I think we were still on for that. General recap on the Chiefs and the Ravens, because I think some of that got cut off.
Yeah, if it stays at this ownership, it's going to be my favorite game to team stack with the Chiefs and then overall game stack. My interest in Kansas City is Sammy Watkins on like a tier of his own, then Travis Kelce, then Hardman, then Robinson, and nothing really in the backfield. Eric Fisher is injured 4 to 6 weeks. That hurts those guys, even if McCoy and Williams were healthy and not splitting touches. And then on the Baltimore side, we talked about it. Mark Andrews through 2 weeks is virtually the best tight end in the league, first in yards, first in air yards, third in targets, second in receptions. He looks fantastic, and he's doing it on 50% of the snaps. But when he's out there, he's running routes. So it is all fine with the usage. But I probably have the most interest in Hollywood Brown, 40% of the team's targeted air yards. And last week, he just looked fantastic. 8 receptions. There was about 3 of them that were deep down the field. But other than that, most of them were within like 10 yards. So he's not just relying on a deep pass. So he's getting utilized in the short and intermediate range, which just gives you overall more upside, not hoping to be more boom and busty. You can just be more consistent week in and week out. So he's the guy that I would run it back with if you're going to team stack the most. And this is probably my favorite spot now overall because just the ownership on all these guys is just too low.
Okay. Let's talk about Minnesota and Oakland. And in case anyone missed, just to stress this, we really like Sammy Watkins this week coming off of last week. I really like potential game stacks here if the ownership is going to be way down. So pretty excited about that game, especially if throughout the week we continue to see depressed ownership. All right, I'm going to send this link back out. Set me up with where we're going with this Minnesota-Oakland game, starting with the Vikings.
Yeah, I'll start with the Vikings. Dalvin Cook's just in a prime spot. Just being a huge favorite here. He's way too cheap. And like even if things weren't wrong with the Saints in terms of like Kamara and having no Drew Brees, it's still Dalvin Cook at 7,800 for me. He's been fed the second most times in the league right now, 41 times. He leads the league in rushing overall, 265 yards, said second in attempts, 41 only behind Marlon Mack. And he has 38 more yards ahead of the next closest guy. So their game plan is just to run, even in a game where they were trailing 21-0 early last week. And throughout the entire game down the entire time, they were still feeding Dalvin Cook. Kirk Cousins still only threw low 30s in terms of his pass attempts. So I think Dalvin Cook is a clear, fantastic play here. He just looks – the only concern is that he has faced, because they know that this team wants to run, 8 men in the box on 29.3% of his carries. That's skewed a little bit. But even then, he's still looking fantastic. So I like Dalvin Cook. It's a fantastic spot. Checks the boxes as a home favorite. Diggs is the other thing that stands out here. His game log last week is going to look extremely different than it was. Like 1 catch, 49-yard touchdown. He had a touchdown called back. He had 2 other receptions called back. And 2 times he was targeted. The other 2 times were interceptions. So he was involved heavily. I just didn't end up looking that way just due to penalties, interceptions, and whatnot. So ended up just ending with that 49-yard touchdown. He's too cheap at $6,000, but it's a loaded position. I have slight interest in Diggs and very heavy interest in Dalvin Cook from that side. Not much interest in Thielen at his price tag. I'll say Kyle Rudolph ran a lot more routes, but in terms of the tight end position, I'm just not going to get there.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, for me, the one guy that stands out, and this should come as no surprise to anyone, would be Dalvin Cook. I mean, he's just been superb through the first couple of weeks. This is not a spot where I'm particularly concerned that he can produce. I expect them to either be playing with the lead or in a competitive game, but mostly playing with the lead. And while Oakland has looked decent in run defense this season, they're 4th in run defense DVOA through 2 weeks, according to Football Outsiders. And Pro Football Focus has their run defense, I think, top 15. Yeah, 13th. So not bad. But at the same time, I'm just not terribly concerned in a game where the script should favor Dalvin Cook significantly. And look, week 1, they faced Phillip Lindsay and Royce Freeman, and then Damian Williams, who I'm just really not that sold on. Not to mention, they didn't really need to run because every time Mahomes threw more than 10 yards downfield, it was a touchdown. What are your thoughts on Oakland? Any interest here?
Yeah, so overall thoughts on Oakland is that Darren Waller is like the only thing that I would get to. He's still too cheap. I mean, it's a tight end position that is just all the top end guys are even too cheap, but he's only $4,100. He played 95% of the snaps last week, 100% the week before, leads the team in targets with 15. He's top 3 in tight end receptions right now. So he's the guy who stands out. Tyrell Williams is dealing with a hip pointer. So he is questionable as of right now, as of yesterday. So in my opinion, that makes it even more volume being funneled to the middle of the field for Waller if that was to happen. And then Josh Jacobs is dealing with an illness. He seems very game flow dependent after what we saw last week, which is concerning. But right here, it's just Darren Waller for a cheap tight end option. And I actually do have interest because the guy's on the field nonstop.
Yeah, look, he's going to get targeted, and he should convert most of those targets into receptions. I'm not in love with him just because the tight end position has so much talent this week, and I think I can get away from it. But at his price, I'm not opposed to it either. Just more than anything, I keep coming back to like Andrews and Ingram and going up even higher to Kittle, specifically Ertz, Kelsey, and another guy who we will get to in a couple of games, and O.J. Howard. Very interesting stuff on him. We can talk about that when we get to that game 4 from now. But let's talk about the Patriots and the Jets. As I mentioned, Dolphins don't have the lowest implied total on the slate. The honor goes to the New York Jets at 10.75. Unbelievable. Truly unbelievable. They're 22.5-point dogs. At this point, with their 33.25 implied total, I really don't know what to say about the Patriots other than they're going to score points. I just don't know where they're going to come from. And it's the same way I felt last week against Miami.
Yeah, I'll start with the Patriots. So I actually, this is the hardest spot on the slate is this 7K range of wide receiver, but I think AB is just a steal at that price. But I also think that about Julio and Keenan Allen, so it's tough. But he didn't play any snaps, right? Didn't play week 1. Played 33% of the snaps last week. Saw 8 targets, 5 red zone looks. So he already ranked second in red zone targets after playing a third of one game. But the thing that's really interesting, he played 57% of the time his snaps, which is small sample, but in the slot. So that it ended up creating a 3-year low for Julian Edelman's targets, which is actually concerning. Like if they're going to utilize AB that way, huge for AB, bigger upside for him, but it is actually taking away from Edelman. I didn't expect to see that. I'll see if it's just small sample or if it's something that's going to keep going moving forward. So AB is definitely interesting at that price point. Sony Michel, he's just been very ineffective in terms of success rate through 2 games where they've led big. But I will say Quinnen Williams is day-to-day. Likely, it seems he's leaning not to play this week, which would help Sony Michel in the backfield as a huge favorite. So there's slight interest there, but guys around him, like we talked about Marlon Mack, I have more interest. Even Aaron Jones comes in just because he was being utilized as a receiver with more interest. So it's just tough to get to Michel, albeit a good situation. AB is the guy that I like the most from New England right now. Tom Brady, also in a favorable spot. He's still going to be in the game no matter how big they're up, it seems, through the first 2 weeks. He threw a touchdown with 2 minutes left, just blowing out Miami last week. It was insane. But just other quarterbacks more interest. So AB is the one that I get to the most from this game. And I will say that just the Patriots defense is in a smash spot for sure. Brady averaging 9.5 yards per attempt through 2 games is just nuts.
Any interest in Rex Burkhead?
No interest in Burkhead. James White price doesn't change. Always a fine GPP option, especially if you did want a team stack.
I know you talked about Bell earlier in the week. Do you see yourself getting to him at all? I personally don't think I'll get there. It's just such a deep position, and as much volume as he's going to get, I think I can probably find it elsewhere in a more favorable game script. What about you for this Jets squad?
Yeah, I mean, the most notable news is that Quinnen Williams is probably day to day because that just helps if you have interest in Sony Michel. Bell, yeah, Tuesday I had interest until you dropped the line that they're 10-point team total. So it's just so hard to even consider. Like the touches are there, they'll probably be there, but also Bill Belichick is gonna know that he's the only thing that can make this team get first downs. He'll have a ton of targets. He had 8 last week from Folk, but overall, just Bell's upside when he's priced right next to Austin Eckler is just insane to try and get to Bell there, unless you're just doing it for pure ownership play. That team total is so low. The upside really has to come from like 12 catches for Bell, which is possible. But I think you have other more favorable spots. Robbie Anderson will get Stephon Gilmore shadow treatment and also be seeing the ball from Luke Folk. So no interest there at all. Just keep an eye on Quinnen Williams is the only real news for the Jets.
Okay. Talk about the Eagles and Detroit. Carson Wentz will not have a number of his usual weapons here. Deshaun Jackson is expected to miss about 2 weeks, which sucks because I'm going to Lambeau Field. And if I go there and their top wide receivers are Matt Collins and Nelson Aguilar, man, I'm going to be pissed. Really pissed. Now, this is not a cheap trip I'm making. I wasn't doing it so I could watch Nelson Aguilar, drop game-winning touchdowns. Whatever. Okay. I'm so furious about this if this ends up being the case. I'm just hoping one of them's back. But right now it looks like Jeffrey and Jackson will be out. Looks like Dallas Goedert will be out. This team runs a lot of 12 personnel, which means that it'll be very difficult for them to do that now. They just signed Alex Ellis from the practice squad. That's really exciting. But Zach Ertz's inability to block also hurts them. I still think they win. I still think they put points up. And what I was talking about earlier that I tweeted, I think it's a really interesting stat, is J.J. Arcega-Whiteside only saw 4 targets last week, but he played 93% of the offensive snaps, ran the 6th most routes among any receiver in the NFL, and had an ADOT of 17 yards. So he's very cheap. It's very possible that he and Carson don't have any chemistry, but they have worked together all week. And more than anything else, he's discounted in a game where he'll probably go overlooked because he's done nothing through the first 2 weeks. But once you look deeper into those numbers, man, there's a little bit of appeal here for me.
Yeah, so Philadelphia is just the spot this week in terms of what everybody's trying to decide to do with this value. I still think that on Philadelphia's side, just even above the value in terms of Nelson Aguilar, is Zach Ertz is still just 5,700 is too cheap for a guy. 16 targets last week, 100% of the snaps, leads all tight ends. Right now, after last week, he jumped Mark Andrews in air yards, leads all tight ends in routes run, and it's not going to change this week. Goddard didn't practice on Wednesday, so he's not trending well. No interest in the backfield. Ertz is my favorite play from this team, not from the game though, but from this team. And then, you have just so much value in Aguilar, 3,600. He's probably locked into like 7 targets here. We talked Tuesday on where Darius Slay is going to be. And the more I looked into it, he shadowed last week a lot with Keenan Allen. Week 1, though, he didn't shadow. So I have a really good just feeling that he's not going to shadow in this game. And I doubt he's going to be following Aguilar, who's going to be fulfilling or being in the slot 80% of his routes so far this season, over 80%. I don't know if he's going to actually shadow anybody, let alone follow Aguilar into the slot. He rarely follows people into the slot when I look back into it. He just happened to do it with Allen last week because Keenan Allen's just a monster in the slot and can ruin a game. So, Aguilar 3,600 is too cheap. The ownership is coming in on him. It's coming in on Ertz. That's the way that I see it. Ertz number 1, Aguilar number 2 from this game. And then, you jump down into some of the value that's also going to be on the field. Matt Collins taking the place of the Deshaun Jackson role. Some experience there a little bit in Philadelphia, sort of a field stretcher. You talked about J-Jaw, who's on the field a ton. So overall, not a ton of usage from a target standpoint, but snaps and routes run was up there, and he's not getting any interest either. So the way that I'm looking at this game is Aguilar is chalky. He definitely deserves that at 3,600, but coming in around 20% ownership. Can he ruin the entire slate for 20% of people? I think yes, more so than not. And I'm going to be leaning heavily on Ertz because it's not even like Ertz is 6,800. He's $5,700. In terms of the other guys down low, I lean Matt Collins just because of the big play upside for GPPs. But I really don't know how to differentiate between those guys down there. Just for a rookie and a guy who hasn't been on the field a lot outside of last week, I'm really just sticking to Zach Ertz, and then I'll get to some of Aguilar as of now.
Okay. Yeah, my number 3 here would be Arcega-Whiteside over Matt Collins, just due to one simple reason, and that's that Arcega-Whiteside had the best contested catch rate in all of college football, which means that when you don't have Alshon Jeffrey in the end zone where Carson Wentz has leaned on him for the past few years, you could see Arcega-Whiteside come into play here. I actually think you will. So that to me is interesting. He also has enough speed to get deep and create some separation. Matt Collins is a lot more one-dimensional. So, I think Aguilar has to be in play at this price. Zach Ertz, a top tight end play. The thing, though, is I don't know how much Wentz I really want. Like, there's just so many good quarterbacks that it's tough for me to fall in love with him here.
Yeah, I just don't have any interest in Wentz. This Detroit defense has actually been pretty good overall, and it's just not a spot where down to your top 2 receivers pretty much I want to be getting to Carson Wentz, who himself doesn't look completely right. And, that's when you start saying, okay, but I already have Ertz, I already have Aguilar. I don't want to force Wentz in there. I'd rather just pick pieces, and for the most part, I'll get to the most Ertz.
Okay. What about the other side? Kenny Galladay has been really good. I like what I'm seeing from him. I rattled off a bunch of stats. So did Spags yesterday on the Wednesday strategy show. And he will be targeted deep, which I think really benefits him against guys like Ronald Darby. Hell, unless the Eagles trade for Jalen Ramsey before tonight's game, it's going to be another ugly situation for that secondary. They've been carved up, specifically Darby, and I think Galladay will be able to get some separation and get downfield into the end zone. Outside of that, though, I just don't have interest in Curry Johnson. I don't really have a ton of interest. Maybe if I'm running back the Eagles with like Galladay or Marvin Jones, sure, but I'm not huge on Hawkinson at a deep tight end position. For me, it's mostly just Galladay here. What about you?
Yeah, I'll talk about a couple other pieces, but it's the only real interest. My favorite play in the entire game is Kenny Galladay. 19 targets through 2 weeks, fourth in air yards in the league. And you touched on it. The Eagles are just getting destroyed in the secondary on the outside, specifically Darby. Guys that tore them up, Julio last week. On the other side, last week on the other side of it, on the outside, Ridley, Scary Terry week 1. And now you have Kenny Galladay, who's looked fantastic. Saw a 33% target share last week, 10 targets on 30 Stafford pass attempts. He's the one play here that I like, and it's just a matchup nightmare. This is like an explosion spot for Kenny Galladay, who, as of right now, is not getting any ownership on him. Seems like just a really good one-off play from this game, at least from this team. I don't have interest in stacking. I saw people all interested in Matthew Stafford, but week 1's game was a huge outlier in overtime against right now the second fastest paced team in the league, the Cardinals. And that's something I don't expect to happen. I expect these 30 pass attempts more so like you saw last week. So people like wanting to get back on the Danny Amendola train. He's going to be on the field for like 50% of the snaps. He'll be in the slot for pretty much all of them, but you're not having like 15 to 20 more targets out of Stafford like you had last week, which is the only way that you get more of a ceiling out of Amendola for tournaments. So no interest there. Kerryon Johnson, I will say the release of C.J. Anderson helps him a little, but honestly, I think it helps Ty Johnson even more, the way that they're running this backfield. Malik Jackson, the Eagles lost week 1. Now they're going to be without Tim Jerrigan week 2, so it's a lot better for the backfield there. It's just a matter of I still think it'll be like a 60-40 split for some odd reason with Kerryon and Ty Johnson back there. So, yeah, it's Kenny Galladay by far and away. And I would say, once again, like, don't be trying to jam in Danny Amendola stacks into your lineups because that upside is so low.
Yeah, and look, despite injuries that they have everywhere, this Eagles defensive line is still incredibly good. I mean, really good. Their run defense ranks second in the league right now. That should come as a surprise to absolutely nobody. It's really just not a spot that I have. And by the way, according to Pro Football Focus, they rank third. Football Outsiders DVOA second. So as you can see, they've been excellent. Just no interest in Curry and Johnson at a deep position for me. All right. Arizona, Carolina. We've talked about it, and throughout the season, we won't have to mention it as much as we do, but just for anyone that's new to the show and doesn't know this, Arizona is playing at the fastest pace in the league by a wide margin, to the point where Fitzgerald, Bird, and Kirk all rank top 4 in routes run this season, which is incredible. And it's not that surprising. They've got a home matchup against Carolina, and I guess the way I see it is they're going to run a lot of plays. The Carolina Panthers likely aren't going to control time of possession all that much, whether it's Cam Newton or Kyle Allen. And there's just a lot of opportunity, or at least there should be a lot of opportunity for the Arizona Cardinals to put up some numbers, or at least, move the football. They've got a 22-point implied total. They're actually 1.5-point favorites right now. That seems wrong though. If the Panthers are higher, well, whatever. I think they're still 1.5-point favorites. 44.5 over under. There's so many plays run that Kirk and Fitzgerald and minimum salary Damiere Byrd has to be discussed.
Yeah. Okay. So here's the thing with this game. Like, even with Allen probably starting in place of Cam, I still think, like, the way that I've been projecting pace for a couple of years, nothing even comes close to what this is looking like in terms of how fast both teams are going to be playing. You mentioned the stat the other day that like 3 of the top 4 players in the league in terms of routes run were Cardinals players. Mm-hmm. And like the other 2 players to round out that top 4, because there's a tie for 4, are for 4th place, is Curtis Samuel and DJ Moore. So this game is just going to feature so many plays. You can say that, yeah, Allen's in there, so some more. We'll start with Carolina. Allen's in there, so more stalled drives for Carolina. But I mean, a banged up Cam Newton has looked terrible for 2 weeks, and we saw sort of definitely a ceiling game out of McCaffrey week 1, and he got even more. The injury was worse, you have to imagine, last week for Cam, which hurt the entire offense. So Allen coming in with the amount of plays that are going to be in this game, even if they're still stalled drives, I still think it's a beneficial spot for guys like McCaffrey at that price point, who probably, at least to start the week, was at very high ownership. I want to see what happens as the week goes on. I'd be more concerned with like the wide receivers in this game, but there's just so many snaps. So I still have a lot of interest in McCaffrey. I still think Greg Olsen is worth mentioning in a fine play at his price point, even if Allen starts. 4th in targets so far, running 90% of the snaps out there, and 2nd in routes run for a tight end, which is pretty crazy for Greg Olsen. So it goes McCaffrey by far and away, even if Cam's not out there. Then Greg Olsen. These wide receivers, I think you can find better spots than Samuel and Moore, especially even in this game. And then moving over to Arizona, yeah, it's fantastic. Like Kyler Murray in this offense is going to be so fun to watch all year long. You're going to get 2 slot wide receivers because they play so many just 4 wide receiver sets. And against this Carolina team in week 1, in a week where Jared Goff was extremely inaccurate, like the most inaccurate in his career, you still saw slot wide receiver Cooper Kupp catch 7 balls. Last week, you saw Chris Godwin catch 8 for 121 yards and a touchdown on Thursday Night Football. So I think this is a fantastic spot. The market knows it. The ownership showing it for Larry Fitzgerald and Christian Kirk. Damiere Byrd, like we mentioned it the other day, and $3,000 price tag is very favorable. But like if he's going to start to come up to like 12, 15% owned, it's just an easy fade, at least for me. But yeah, Christian Kirk is probably my favorite play in the entire game. And then McCaffrey, then Fitzgerald right now. And I think you can play Kyler Murray and feel confident.
Okay. Yeah, I'm with you. By the way, I was wrong. Last I looked, it wasn't updated yet on Tuesday. It's now updated on Football Outsiders, and Carolina leads the league in seconds per play. So
that's great.
Yeah, it was Arizona by a decent amount after week 1. I thought it had updated, but it hadn't. So that's pretty crazy. 2 of the fastest teams. The funny thing is I don't expect either of them to be all that efficient, but it might not matter that much. So game stacking this one just makes a lot of sense. Which side do you like the most for game stacks or for team stacks? For me, I think I don't know if I have a preference because McCaffrey, Samuel, and Moore on one end are incredible, but then you're playing Kyle Allen, and then on the other side you have Kirk, Fitzgerald, Byrd, and I don't know if I want to play David Johnson with Kyler Murray. That's another thing I'm not sure of.
Yeah, I think it. Yeah, I don't want to play David Johnson just in general. If he was like very low owned, at least on our initial ownership, I would have more interest, but it doesn't seem that way right now. I think I'm more interested in the Arizona side, Christian Kirk, Larry Fitz, and Murray, and then run it back with either McCaffrey or if you can't afford it, a cheap value tight end in Greg Olsen. But it's like you said, it doesn't really matter too much if you have like 2 more stalled drives than usual with a guy like Allen, which I don't even think is really the case with how bad Cam Newton was playing, because they're going to have like 3 extra drives in this game with how fast they're playing overall. So I think it's a really good spot. I think even with Cam not being in there, CMC is just as good really as he is any other week, because this Arizona defense against running backs for 2 years now, bottom 5, especially to start the first 2 weeks, and he's playing 100% of the snaps.
All right. Another game I really like. There are a few games on this slate that I really like. So far, you have now Buffalo and Cincinnati. I like pieces of it. John Brown, I think we agree there. Dallas, I really like Dallas. I don't have much interest at all in Miami. Indianapolis, I think it's okay, but I'm really not looking to target the quarterbacks. So Baltimore and Kansas City is a game I really like as an actual game, full game. Arizona, Carolina, and then this next one, Tampa Bay and the New York Giants. I can't tell you what's going to happen with Winston. I wish I could. I'd have a lot more money in my pocket, but I can't. I do know, however, that they've got to be working on fixing whatever isn't working. It might just be that Winston isn't good. I've been saying that he isn't good for years, and then I finally take the bait. I'm like, all right, Arians will fix it. And we've seen what happens so far. Again, to be fair, I think the Niners defense is a lot better than initially suspected. And, right now their pass defense has not been bad at all. According to Pro Football Focus, they have one of the better ones, 3rd in the league, right basically tied for 2nd with the LA Rams. So I'll give them credit. And the Panthers ranked top 10 as well. So, okay, Now let's look at the Giants. Well, the Giants rank dead last in pass coverage according to Pro Football Focus. That should not surprise you. They have been terrible. They've been carved up all across the field. It doesn't matter who's throwing, where they're throwing, or who they're throwing to. And then, of course, on Football Outsiders DVOA metric, they rank 31st ahead of only Miami. I mean, I'll tell you what, dude, if he can't get it done here, it's going to be ugly going forward. But I really like Godwin, Winston, Evans. And you know what? I will be going back to O.J. Howard. Bruce Arians said the targets are going to come. Sometimes the squeaky wheel does get the grease. And when you're playing as many snaps as he did, and you've seen your price tag come down to where it did, he's down $1,200 from week one. I'm probably going to get a piece of O.J. Howard as well.
Yeah, so, I mean, you said it. The Tampa Bay spot overall, they have a nice team total. They have the best matchup, at least through 2 weeks, that you can have. And, people were trying to tell me that Janoris Jenkins is still a, stud cornerback. He's not. Mike Evans is in a very good spot this week. If you look through the first 2 weeks, Janoris Jenkins is not graded out well. He's in the 50s in Pro Football Focus grading. And if the 60s is when it starts to get bad. So, not great. Jameis right now, still coming in as my number one quarterback on the week. It's been that way since we talked about it Tuesday. He's just too cheap. He's too cheap, and he grades out extremely well for me. Just seeing some of the stuff that Alex put up, it makes me feel even better about the spot. For me, what I'm seeing when you try to get the team stacks, you're not forced to be going into an O.J. Howard play, but just because he's so cheap, going to a $6,900 Godwin, $6,600 Mike Evans, it kind of limits what you can do with the rest of your lineup, especially at the running back position this week, because that's the one spot I do want to pay up. So Jameis is the quarterback. I love it. And yeah, this stack overall is right now a top 3 stack interest of mine. It makes sense. The guys that you want to get to in this order for me is actually Godwin, Evans, and O.J. Howard. That should probably come to no surprise. He is right now, it's the 4th highest. Before this started, I think it might be 5th now, highest team total. And honestly, Jameis Winston, I think what's happening here is week 1, yeah, looked terrible. One of his interceptions was a deflection. One of his fumbles, after looking back at that fumble, it was more of a bad snap. But either way, it looked bad. But week 2, I mean, they ran the ball 8 or 9 more times more than they threw. But he still had over 8 yards per attempt. I mean, it wasn't a fantastic game, but he actually looked composed and a little better. And now he just has the softest defense that he's probably going to face all year. So the price point is too good. I get it. If you don't want to play him in cash just because of his history. But I think the whole industry is really anchored on week 1's performance. And if that's the case, I know after 16 games, he's not going to have stats this bad in this offense. And this is probably the best spot overall. If he doesn't get it done here, I'll just never tout this guy again.
Oh, dude, I'm with you. And I feel confident saying that, yeah, I'll never want his name to leave my mouth because of how devastated I'll be. But you know what? This is DFS, and you've got to take risks. You can't just look at players and because they had a couple bad games, not want to play them again. And you have to take everything into consideration, not just the overall stat line, but why it happened. And I think we just broke it all down there. On the Giants, the reason I like this game a lot as a collective is because if I ran it back with Barkley, I'd feel great about it. If I ran it back with Ingram, I'd feel good about it. I don't know what Sterling Shepard's status is right now. I know that he was on the field for the start of Thursday practice and wasn't sporting a non-contact jersey. Wednesday, he was donning a red no-contact jersey, was a limited participant. So it looks like he could be back in the mix this week. Even if I had Shepard, I'd feel okay about it. Just overall, this is a game that on both sides makes for really good game stacks.
Yeah, I agree. It's at least evident to me that Daniel Jones coming in is going to be a bump up for this entire offense. So it's not even the narrative, oh, there's a rookie quarterback in. No,
right.
It's going to be better than what Eli Manning was doing in there.
It's better than a dead quarterback.
Yeah, honestly. But you have Saquon, who is second in the league in rushing on 12 by 38 yards to Dalvin Cook on 12 less attempts. It's just insane how good this guy is, especially beating the first tackler. So, yeah, like you said, the ownership, if Saquon Barkley, and right now it's low, if it dips into single digits, it should never be that low. We saw that last week when he's just getting overlooked. He's his floor on this offense, especially now with a quarterback who can potentially sustain drives, his floor is 15 to 18 fantasy points. It's so good at how good he is at breaking tackles and still being involved in the receiving game. Evan Ingram, too cheap. Price doesn't change in what was probably a floor game for him last week at how bad Eli played and just how he wasn't able to get down the field, Evan Ingram, in a lot of his routes. So, yeah, running it back with Ingram is probably my first priority due to pricing. But Saquon right now is a very interesting question because Zeke's in such a good spot overall. And really, the way you get to Saquon probably is you have to give up Zeke in a lot of your lineups. But if this ownership holds, I'm probably going to have. And what happened on Sunday was I got to more Saquon because of the ownership, and it ended up working out. And I'm hoping if that stays the same, I'm going to be getting to more Saquon in what is probably definitely from week 1 to week 2. This is the best spot that he'll get in.
Yeah, I like this game from every angle, and like I said, OJ Howard, I'm not really too afraid to get him in there, and the reason is here's the reason, because OJ Howard when he's targeted is one of the has some of the from an air yard standpoint from ADOT, you don't find many tight ends that see the ball aired out like they do to him. So the good thing is that if he's getting targeted, these are going to be high upside targets and not just short, 3 or 4 yard dink and dunk nonsense that isn't going to get him where you need to go. So I'll take that boom or bust risk with OJ Howard, knowing that he can break one off.
Yeah. And then literally just a closing note for this is that the linebacker Devin White for the Bucs right now, he's likely to miss this one. Like it was first said day to day, and then there's just been negative talk around his chances of playing. That's just an even bigger bump for Saquon and Evan Ingram. Because that's definitely their best linebacker and probably just overall best player in their front seven.
Okay. Let's talk. We got 3 to go. By the way, Awesomo.com/join. If you haven't signed up at Awesomo.com yet, that's how you do so. And you can get 50% off your first month of all access Awesomo Plus membership by using the sign-up code NFL Strategy, all one word. So if you haven't done it, Awesomo.com/join, you'll see brand new landing page we got there. It'll give you an idea into everything that you would be signing up for, that you would be getting, so you're not flying blind into any of this. Like I said, you can check out all of the different memberships we have. We even have videos and basic like tutorials on what you're getting with all of the tools from Premium Slack to Awesomo's picks to the lineup builder to player projections, ownership projections, the Fantasy Cruncher add-on, and so much more. So check it out. We also have an express package starting at $3.95 a week. So that'll get you some really cool tools as well. You can check all of that out at Awesomo.com/join and use the sign-up code NFL Strategy if you want to start a monthly subscription. Get you half off your first month. So it's pretty sweet. Say what's up. Introduce yourself in the premium Slack chat if you do decide to sign up as well. All right, Chargers, Houston. I wish I had more interest in this game, but it's really just Eckler, Keenan Allen because of the massive amounts of volume, and then I'm never going to turn down DeAndre Hopkins with what he's capable of doing from a market share standpoint.
Yeah, so my interest in this game is just purely full-on game stacks, like 3 players from one team, running back with 2 from the other. And I actually like it as like a contrarian spot, especially for 3 maxes. And then obviously if you're 150 maxing and in just huge GPP tournaments, I really like this spot because you're going to get Watson probably in at least at best playing in a neutral game script, potentially from behind, which is where he plays just the best in general. He'll use his legs more. Hopkins is always a fine play. Will Fuller right now is just on this slate, number 1 in terms of his air yards per target. The big question is, does he have enough time to throw for Watson? Because Will Fuller's matchup is going to be fantastic. You have Casey Hayward, who's probably going to be lined up over on Hopkins, which is fine for Hopkins. You have Desmond King in the slot on Kiki and or Kenny Stills. Don't have any interest in them. But Will Fuller on the other side, right now, they're playing musical chairs with sort of their number 2 cornerback, the Chargers. And that's just going to be a mismatch for Will Fuller, a guy who really hasn't popped off yet. I like him as the best play for me from the Texans as a one-off. But I really like in terms of just a contrarian game stack here, getting to Watson, Fuller, and then Hopkins, and then running it back with the players on the other side, like you said, the ones that stand out, Keenan Allen and or Austin Eckler. That's the only spot I'm going to get to this. You have right now leading the slate on air yards per target, like I said, is Fuller on 94% of the snaps. I just really like the overall spot. And the other thing is Derwin James isn't playing. And the guy who was filling in for Derwin James isn't going to play, Adrian Phillips. So they're down to like a 3rd-string safety, and their number 2 cornerback on the outside at least is a backup as well. So I think there is upside here. We know what Hopkins and really Watson can do from a fantasy perspective. And if the ownership's going to stay low, I'm going to have shares of just game stacks and sort of the 3 maxes that I personally play in.
Okay. And look, I'll say this much. The biggest thing for me is what does the pass rush look like for the opposing team if you're looking to target Will Fuller? It's not to say that Watson isn't going to get some off, right? And not like it's not like he's going to be sacked on every play, but it is always important to me. Is it one of the nastiest pass rushers that's going to have him on his ass all night or all day, or will he be able to stay upright enough to get the ball out? And I would say this Chargers pass rush probably ranks somewhere in the middle of the league.
Yeah, and then the only other thing that's good is Tunsil left the game in week 2, but all reports are saying that he's expected to play, which is definitely a huge help for that line.
Okay. Two more here, Sal. Seattle and New Orleans, and then we'll get to San Francisco and Pittsburgh. Russell Wilson, and, well, kind of odd. Sean Payton basically said, when asked by the media about Taysom Hill backing up Bridgewater, he's like, what makes you think Taysom Hill's the backup?
Yeah.
Meaning, for all we know, they could split work or Bridgewater could be the backup. Who the hell knows? But we don't necessarily have clarity here yet, Sal.
Yeah, we don't have clarity right now in terms of like just notes for New Orleans. I have that, like you just said, which is just weird. You're going to have either way, like Hill on the field. And like the role that he plays is good because he's a quarterback, but like so many other players can play that role better. It's just so weird. Like just how overhyped he is when he's on the field in those positions. And they just go to him when he's on the field. It's like, it's not even deception at that point. But yeah, I'm probably not going to be getting too much of Kamara Thomas. You have to imagine, like in relief duty, Teddy Bridgewater, I'm not going to criticize how he did because that's not his game plan. So when he has a whole week to plan with Sean Payton, one of the best coaches in the league, it's going to be better. But then you have to ask yourself, outside of the vacuum, Thomas is around a lot of other wide receivers that don't have question marks. Same thing could be said for Kamara, who's more expensive by $200 than a guy like Dalvin Cook, who doesn't have any question marks as far as I'm concerned. So it's just tough to get here overall with a backup quarterback in, and it's just not as much upside. The only thing I'll say is that wide receiver depth is super thin. Kirkwood went on the IR, and then you have Traquan Smith didn't practice Wednesday, and he's murky. But it just doesn't add up for me if there's no Drew Brees there compared to all the other favorably priced wide receivers and even running backs.
Yeah, I have no pushback on that at all. And even with Alvin Kamara, I think that they'll look to exploit him and utilize him as much as possible. You'd be crazy not to. And as you pointed out, Peyton is a smart coach. They'll figure something out. But I don't know if it's really worth it. So a couple of things. First of all, Seattle run defense is pretty strong. I think we've seen that over the first couple of weeks. The pass defense, it's really hard to say. They gave up a career-high 418 yards to Andy Dalton in week 1. And then they went up against Mason Rudolph and a clearly injured from the jump Ben Roethlisberger. So I think the jury's still out there. My expectation is they'll be somewhere around the middle of the league. But they've been good. Top 10 in run defense so far this season. Pass defense, I'm not making any assessments quite yet. But the big thing is, and you kind of touched on this already, Alvin Kamara is 8K. We'll use Draftkings. 8K on Draftkings. You have Dalvin Cook at 78. McCaffrey's only 700 more. Now, he doesn't have a quarterback there, he doesn't have Cam Newton, but that didn't make a difference in week 1. And this game should see an incredible amount of snaps. Like there are so many guys around him that I could make better arguments for. So I feel like just as a product of the slate, Alvin Kamara is not going to show up as much in my crunches as some of these other guys like McCaffrey, Elliott, and Cook.
Yeah, like he's by far just too cheap if Drew Brees was playing, but he's not. So I'm just not going to get there. It's very interesting that he wasn't used more in the passing game last week. I imagine that changes, but like you said, just the pieces around them, not as much question marks and probably more upside.
Okay. What about the opposite side, Seattle? Metcalf, Lockett, Carson, Wilson. Let's start with Chris Carson on the ground.
Yeah, Chris Carson, this is an interesting situation. So as far as the last time I looked at the ownership projections, he's coming in ahead of guys like Marlon Mack, and I would disagree with that. He's lost 3 fumbles this year. So when I was on the show Tuesday, his snap count going from 77% to 54% last week. I didn't know if he got injured at some point in the game. And then when I looked into it more, the guy's lost 3 fumbles. So that's definitely a factor of why you saw less snaps. Also, CJ Prosise came back, played 13% of the snaps. Rashad Penny, he's always just kind of fixed into for the start of the season, you were expecting like a 25% to 30% snap share. So that's nothing concerning that his went up to like 33%. It's mainly that Chris Carson can't hang on to the ball. And when he fumbled once again in that last game and lost it for the 3rd time on the year, they just said, okay, we're going to give more touches to Penny. And with Procise coming back and playing more snaps, that's concerning for Carson. I'm not like totally worried if you own him in season long, but for DFS purposes, I'm just not going to get there this week because 23% less snaps after the guy has fumbling issues and the guy filling in for him took a touchdown to the house. Yeah, it's not a good recipe for success, especially when Marlon Mack is lower owned than him right now. So that's where I stand on Carson. It's a little bit worrisome. And yeah, the fumbling is a big issue.
Yeah, and I mean, the 2 touchdowns in week 1 salvaged what would have been a very pedestrian game.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I don't disagree, man. I think this is a spot where you don't have to get to Carson. I prefer Mack. I probably prefer Aaron Jones. What about the passing game against the Saints?
Yeah, so I mean, DK looks.
I'm sorry, Sal. I forgot to mention this. Kind of important. Run defense this season, the pass rush. Just to point this out, once we get to the quarterback and receivers here, the Saints right now rank number 1 in pass rush, which has to mean something.
Yeah, like this overall game for me is pretty much like a wash. I mean, I know you have Tyler Lockett. He saw a ton of targets last week, was used heavily in the slot. That's probably the matchup that I want the most against the Saints. So I guess he's like, okay, but he's just sort of another guy in that price range. DK does look legit. He's 52.83% air yards for this team. That's 3rd best in the entire league for like your specific team. He looks legit, but he's very much boom or bust in my opinion, because all he's doing right now is running go routes. Like he's not running any slants. He hasn't run a single slant route, I don't believe, nothing to the middle of the field. He's just running go routes, which it's worked through the first 2 weeks because he's gotten to the end zone. I think he looks legit. I like his play, but for this week, I'm just not going to get there. He'll probably be faced up with Lattimore, which not as great last year's season as rookie season, but still a solid cornerback, has graded out the first 2 weeks. Okay. So the overall game's a wash. Lockett's the best play probably from Seattle. But yeah, the concerns with Carson and what I think is DK being very one-dimensional right now, I'm just not going to end up getting there as opposed to other spots.
Okay. Yeah, I think I'm with you here. A lot of other places to get to and only so many you can go to. Mm-hmm. San Francisco and Pittsburgh, we close it out with this one on this 13-gamer. Manny Laura and Chris Randone will be with you tomorrow on Friday's NFL Strategy Show, doing a little bit of lineup construction, some fantasy cruncher. But hey, if you're not crunching lineups and you're just looking for, seeing what lineups look like when they're built for this week, what looks good, what doesn't, or if you want to learn fantasy cruncher, all of that will be useful tomorrow. So you don't have to be crunching 150 lineups to tune into that stream. And then Saturday, the final tune-up will be with Sal, you and Chris Randone. So yep. You'll want to catch both of those shows as we lead up to week 3. All right. Oh, and by the way, the NFL Showdown stream live before lock tonight will be coming up at 7:30 for Thursday Night Football. So you won't want to miss that. Jimmy Garoppolo, Mason Rudolph. What's your overall take on this game?
Yeah, I mean, there's some pieces that are okay. So yeah, the Pittsburgh side, I don't think they're going to play that much different. You said that Big Ben was like injured from the jump. He just hasn't looked good. Mason Rudolph's the guy that they drafted for this reason, for really this year with concerns around Big Ben retirement. So Rudolph in the preseason has looked fine. I think he's going to be okay here. So Juju, with those other guys priced around him, I'm just not going to get to Juju, although I don't think like season long his value's crushed totally. James Washington stands out a little bit, right? You have the narrative that he went to college with him. He played on 60% of the snaps last week as Moncrief dropped to 31%. And I talked about Will Fuller leading the slate in average air yards per target. Well, James Washington's number 2. So there is some upside for GPPs only there, in my opinion. And he's just dirt cheap. There's so many cheap wide receivers. Washington's is kind of even going above some of those Philly wide receivers for me as a guy who is interesting. Moncrief, I will point out, he's been playing with a dislocated finger, which is definitely a reason why he's playing poorly, but it's not helping his case. The main piece here from this game that I probably get to is Washington. Vance McDonald did play over 90% of the snaps. He was leaned on heavily by Rudolph, but in very short work. Like if he doesn't get in the end zone, it's not as great of a performance. Connor did not practice, but he said he's going on Wednesday, but he said he's going to be good to go. So it's really just James Washington for GPPs for me. On the San Francisco side, Pittsburgh gets Minkah Fitzpatrick. Joe Hayden's going to be healthier. My interest in Jimmy G isn't nearly as high. Deebo Samuel was used, in my opinion, just beautifully last week. Less snaps overall, but just running crisp routes overall and better routes in the middle of the field. So a GPP option, but not high interest for this week. Kittle in a position right now at tight end that you have wide receiver and tight end just so soft pricing. I mean, we talked about Ingram. I mean, even Kelsey's cheap, but we talked about Ingram. We talked about Ertz. It's just tough to get to Kittle in this spot, although it's a very good spot for him. So I guess that's my question really to close it out, I guess, to you is like you have Ingram, who I like this spot. You have Ertz, who's in a fantastic spot. Kelsey, if you want to pay for it. But like Kittle kind of gets lost here, and he's getting lost in the ownership, but he still has upside. So like, I don't know what to do with Kittle right now.
So I ran 800 lineups on Cruncher, and I'm coming up with Ertz as the most, and then Andrews, Ingram, Kelsey. I kind of manipulated that Kelsey to show up a little bit more though because of how I'm feeling about that game, and then Kittle. So
yeah,
there you have it.
I think that's the same interest that I have, like almost exactly in terms of where Kittle ranks. It's just the guy's too cheap, but so is everybody else around him, and those other people are probably in better spots, honestly.
Right? No, it's really tough. It's similar concerns with where am I going to go when it comes to Elliott, McCaffrey, Barkley, Kamara. Like I kind of already ruled Kamara out, not because he can't have a monster game, but because McCaffrey against Arizona, Elliott at home as a 21.5 point favorite against Miami, and then Barkley against Tampa Bay. Just knowing, and you said this, his floor is damn near 20 fantasy points. So that's another tough one where I think you just have to take a stand unless you're going to try and spread it out to the point where you're doing yourself a disservice.
Yeah, that's true, and I agree with that. Yeah, I would definitely watch if Barkley's ownership just stays where it is compared to like Zeke's and McCaffrey's. It's just for me, it's like a no-brainer at that point to get a lot more Barkley. Yeah, the only other thing from San Francisco, the running backs in the first half before it became a blowout, it was pretty much touching a split between Mostart and Breida, and then Wilson got involved in the second half. Jeff Wilson, 2 touchdowns. Joe Staley is going to be out for 6 to 8 weeks though, so that hurts that backfield a ton. It also hurts Jimmy G a decent amount. So I don't have any interest in the backfield, and I think it's just going to become a mess.
I have zero interest there, and I still have respect for Pittsburgh's run defense.
Yeah.
So I mean, I get like, what upside are you really working with here? Like, you hoping that Monster catches another touchdown or Wilson gets into the end zone twice with his 20 snaps or whatever he played? Maybe I think he played less than that. It's tough for me. Like I said, I think Pittsburgh's defense is still better than we've seen in the first 2 weeks. PFF has their run defense second behind only the Ravens. They have them top 10 in tackling. They have them top 2 in pass rush. Coverage has been the one spot. The pass defense has been where they struggled the most, Sal. But on the ground, being able to get pressure, getting tackles for loss, they've still been very good through the first 2 weeks.
Yeah, and that's with like having TJ Watt. Is he still on the PUP list? What is his deal? He came off the PUP list and he's not playing, right?
Yeah, I thought that was it. Hold on, let me check.
Yeah, so I mean, they're still without him as well, who's like definitely their best player up front.
Right. So yeah, I don't know. Actually, no. I thought he played.
Did he play week 2?
I thought so. I'd have to look a little further. I can't remember. Let's see. Yes, he played. He was active.
All right, so that's good then.
Yep. So yeah, no interest in this backfield. Do you have anything on Deebo Samuel or like Marcus Goodwin?
Yeah, nothing really for Goodwin. I mean, he's just the GPP flyer. Samuel, though, like moving forward this year, more interest, not this spot, but he played a lot less snaps as they got Dante Pettis' snaps up. So that usually is concerning. But for a rookie wide receiver, I thought it was okay. And the way that they actually utilized him when he was on the field running routes that are high upside, middle of the field, sort of slant routes, I thought it was really nice the way they utilized him. But this secondary just got a whole lot better with Minka Fitzpatrick there, Joe Hayden getting healthier. So not this week for me on Samuel.
Yeah, and that's a good point. This secondary could be a little bit scary. I think Deebo Samuel, knowing that he got those targets, 7 targets in week 2, but then his snap count, like you said, came down significantly.
Yeah.
That kind of sucks. But, if you're looking at him and you're saying, all right, well, he's discounted, he's cheap, and I need to get him into lineups because I have a bunch of Steelers, fine. But I just think this game in general to me is not that appealing. Like, did you talk about Pittsburgh yet?
Yeah, the Pittsburgh side, it's like really just James Washington and GPPs. His snaps went up and he's getting a ton of air yards.
All right. Yeah, I agree. I don't even know if Connor's going to play. And if he does, I'm still not all that interested. Not going to go to Juju on a week where you've got, like you said, the depth at wide receiver is kind of weak, but at the top, there are several guys that I just really like, and it won't be Juju. I mean, give me the Tampa Bay guys over Juju in a better matchup anyway. So that'll do it for us. Thanks as always for tuning in. Not sure what happened earlier. Stream got killed, but we appreciate you guys finding your way back to us. It means a lot. Hit us with a thumbs up. Like that video if you want to help support us. And if you actually enjoy the content, it's always appreciated. And it really helps us, grow the brand and continue to give you guys free content here on YouTube every day. Subscribe, hit the notification bell as well. Sal, tell them where they can find you outside of our Awesomo strategy show. And any last words before we head out?
I guess the only last word is I didn't touch on earlier, just Emmanuel Sanders, I think, is in an interesting spot. He'll be in the slot a good amount, 33% of the snaps last week, and he leads the league in red zone targets by 2 over any other wide receiver. He has 7, everybody else at 5 or below. So I think it's an interesting spot if he's going to be in the slot a lot against Jamal Williams. But you can find me on Twitter at SalVetriDFS. I have a YouTube channel. It's just my name. I do just content in the fantasy sports space. And then I'll be live on Saturday at 11 a.m. with Chris Randone, just finishing up, going over final ownership and where we stand on the slate.
All right. Thanks as always for hanging out. And if you guys missed the first stream and you tuned in late to this, go back. You'll see it. Also, youtube.com/Awesomo. The first one, the second one. I'll see what I can do putting those ones together to make it easier for anyone that's just tuning in now. We'll see you back here tomorrow on the NFL Strategy Show presented by Yahoo Daily Fantasy Sports.